At the end of 17776, 9 shuts down so they can recharge, assumedly to wake back up fairly soon. 2020 starts not with our space probe muses looking at humanity, but instead a small conversation taking place in Georgia. Would you be surprised to find out that they were talking about football? Well, it wouldn't be a Jon Bois piece without it. Apparently, Georgia Tech has another football, and our 2 lads are staking out the field to try and intercept the ball. One of our characters, Nick, goes off to bed, but not before saying love you and goodnight to Manny, his husband. As Nick goes to sleep, 10 wakes up via alarm clock. Sure, why not? She wakes up our non-binary champion 9, who then goes to surprise an already awake Juice, who just apparently spilled all of his spaghetti on the ground. How could 10 be so cruel? Either way, Juice has been awake for the entire time 9 and 10 have been asleep, and well, he's gotten busy. Juice has been watching Nick and Manny for a while now because they are about to do something wild. With this particular variation of football, players are not allowed to leave the field, which is, a pretty normal rule, but these fields are long, like cross-country football like we've seen before, but these fields go on until they hit either an international border or an ocean. This results in problems of only having specific places to live, get food. Hell, even just moving from point A to point B can be difficult at certain points of the field because our players have to live on the field. There are no real timeouts in this version of football. Everything is constantly happening on the field, including the players' lives, dinners, lunches, sleep, all of it. It's reminiscent of that one odd game of football that is mentioned in passing in a podcast in 17776, but there are some changes. More on that later, though. Nick and Manny are undercover. They do not play for Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech does not know that they are there. What Nick and Manny do know is that someone ran across the highway, the only route that they could take if they were playing on the field, in the middle of a night and carrying what appears to be a football. This mystery player meets up with a bunch of Georgia Tech players in a safe house, and then they all leave to go, well, somewhere else. If a football was left in that house, it would be ripe for the taking, because technically it's a fumble. After doing the math to determine that there are no other players in that house, Nick and Manny prepare to go for the gold. They've been waiting 30 years for an opportunity like this, and they are finally going to take it. 10 and 9 are a bit confused about what they're seeing, but Juice has no time to explain because he is losing his mind right now. Georgia Tech does not have 1 or 2 footballs, but 9, and they are all in that house, and if Nick and Manny can get all of them, then they will have one of the biggest upsets in the history of college football. While they plan for their heist, Juice takes a moment to unhype himself and get into the specifics about this variant of football. This is college football with all the standard rules, 125 players, quarterbacks, safeties, centers, players can't leave the field, normal things. You're like, oh, this is normal football. The field's even the same width, but, the length is extended until it hits an international border or an ocean. Since there are no end zones, points cannot be scored via touchdown, field goal, or any of the other traditional means. So instead, possession of the ball is what's important here. One needs to get all of the footballs to be the winner, not scoring more points than another team. But wait, the reader says, how many balls are in play? Well, before we get to that, it's important to note that there is not just one field that the athletes are playing on. There are no visitors and home teams in the traditional sense. In the images, we clearly see 2 different fields. This is because the 2 teams' fields are both in play. Possession doesn't mean just having the ball, it means having that ball on your team's field. And now here's the kicker, and what pisses off 10 and makes this the subject of the entire work. 111 teams are all playing at the same time, with all their fields intersecting each other, all fighting to have possession over all 111 footballs. Juice has spent his entire time alone from 9 and 10 to reinvent American college football. Every team plays. Welcome to 2020. This is the biggest difference between 17776 and 2020 tonally. While 17776 is much more focused on showing us a wide variety of games, cross-country football, 500 ball, game 27, and Detmer ball, 2020 is just about standing in awe of Juice's wild ride. Bois lets us get real deep into the mechanics of college football and also gets us right into the action. Because of this, 2020 is much more action-packed. The biggest action sequence in 17776 is when Nancy McGunnell gets sucked up in a tornado and shot downfield, and when Lucretia Evans gets her first points in 500. The rest of the work is entertaining, of course, but it's more about interviewing people, hearing stories about what life is like in the future. 2020 has a lot of talking too, but it's all in the context of one game, college football. To call this football is a tad odd. It's more like a form of capture the flag with football interjecting. The game centers around scouting out your opponents, knowing what routes are safe, and knowing when you need to book it. This is a collectathon on a grand scale, one that has been going on for nearly 2,000 years. It's a mess, of course, but Juice does not really care how it feels to play his football games. Remember, Juice loves Game 27, which is a mess beyond messes and hell to play. He cares more about the game itself, the spectacle it creates. That ends up being one of the major themes in 2020, loving the game more than winning. The reason that Juice is freaking out at Nick and Manny getting Georgia Tech's footballs is not because they'll win if they get them. No, they still need 101 more footballs if they're going to do that. Juice is much more excited by this moment that will change the way the game will be played, change how players think of the game itself. All of the space probes love moments like these, stories that show humans in all of their beauty and personality. 9 in particular becomes a research champion and comes in with all these weird facts and stories. This is one of my favorite moments of character development in the story, though I do like how Juice now calls 10 Lady. I think that's really cute. 9 has become enthralled with humanity. They love all the little odd things about them, all the little facts that fill the earth. It feels like 9 really took a lot from their conversation with Nancy at the end of 17776. It's great to see this character becoming more and more fleshed out. In this sense, 9 and the other space probes remind me a lot of Bois. Of course, Bois is well known for being a story liker. Arguably, he likes stories more than sports itself. I know that Bois loves the big picture of sports and doesn't just want a highlights reel like many other people that like sports, but what I'm saying here is that Bois loves the living shit out of little moments, and he just finds so much meaning in it. You can absolutely tell that there are certain parts of the story set in certain parts of America, just that Bois can tell us about Alexander the Great and Cleopatra's remains being in a random small town in Illinois. Either way, it's important to say that Bois is most known for being a sports writer, and like any sports analyst or writer, they love to see it when the big number goes up. Sports writers love the big number over everything else. Every hero, legend, redefiner of the sport, all of them have big numbers attached to their names. Ichiro Suzuki with 4,367 career hits if we add his playing in Japan and America. Baron Davis with an 89-foot bucket at the buzzer. Georgia Tech winning 222-0. All of these teams and players are associated with the big number and subsequently have had a lot written about them by sports writers, Bois included. However, Bois also focuses a lot on stories that are devoid of big numbers. The first episode of Pretty Good focuses on Koo Dae-sung getting a double against Yankee-era Randy Johnson, despite it only being Koo's second time picking up a bat in a professional ballgame, and then scoring from home off of a fucking bunt. It's one of the most exciting moments I've ever seen in baseball. When Koo slides into home, it makes me jump out of my fucking chair. It's hype. It's so hype. But it was only an additional point to the Mets. That's not even close to a big number. Even when Bois does talk about big number sports moments, they are always framed in an interesting way. Suzuki's legendary career hits is sandwiched in with the history of the Mariners, a story about how baseball is a sport where we do focus on the big numbers, but also how these big numbers often do not lead to World Series victories and, more importantly, meaning and happiness. Troy versus DeVry, a game famous purely for its big number, has been talked about by Bois before in an episode of Pretty Good, but also is mentioned in 2020. For those that do not know, Troy scored 253 points, though it is commonly thought to be 258 points, while DeVry ended up scoring 141 points, all in one game, which is a record beyond records. Instead of 9, 10, and Juice viewing this game as, ooh, big number, they instead view it as revolutionary. The game is not seen as a contest, but as a collaborative project. Troy wanted 200 plus points to break the record, and DeVry helped by playing a similar up-tempo offense. This is apparently a common thing in the year 2020, with teams caring much more about accomplishments rather than winning. Outside of his fiction and back to his sports writing, Bois compares this game to Chinlong, a game from Bruma in Myanmar with no real opponent to play against. It's all about keeping a ball in the air. From the footage I've been able to find, it appears that this game is built almost entirely on style, on how impressively one can do the task of keeping a ball in the air. This is not the only non-modern American game that is brought up in 2020. A game played between the Cherokee is also mentioned, though this one is much more competitive. Stickball, from what I've seen, seems to be full contact lacrosse and was used by the tribe for hundreds of years as a way to settle conflicts. Basically, if certain people needed resources that one had and one didn't, you would settle it in stickball. Everyone played it because it was so omnipresent in the space of solving disputes, and it took a life of its own, being much larger than a couple of hours on a Saturday night. Juice took stickball as an inspiration for this new form of college football, and he praises it, calling it a substitute for death, which shows once again how sport is used as a way to get out of violence in a post-scarcity society. I think that these two sports, Chinlon and stickball, both show extreme influence on this new form of college football. What it takes from Chinlon and the Troy and DeVry game is that sports can be taken and transformed in ways that defy traditional thought. It doesn't even need to be a versus thing. What it takes from stickball is that sport can be sprawling, with thousands of athletes collaborating and going against each other all at the same time. This spanning, rule-breaking game is what college football has become. Thousands playing, constantly innovating, and still trying to figure out what they can do with the tools given to them not only by their own ingenuity, but given to them by other players. It's glorious, and you can nerd out about it so hard, and there are moments in this story where if you are a football or strategy nerd, you will just be thinking over what the best play would be to get around the team, how to trick an offense right into your arms, or to scare anyone out of an area. Another reason that this game is so fun to think about is due to its flexibility. This is a game that has nearly no limits outside of someone's ideas. You can play very basically and get results, but to be dominant, to be a real threat, one needs to go outside of the box. And there are very clear examples of genius players in 2020, athletes that break the mold completely. And there are many different ways that this genius is shown, one of which is scaring the competition. This is found in Mimi McKenzie, aka the Shark. Mimi plays for Georgia Southern and plays a fascinating role on the team. We can see in the rules that Juice made for college football that water is considered strictly free play territory. Scrimmage rules do not apply. While in water, any player is allowed to make any play on the ball at any time. Mimi takes great advantage of this to terrorize. She takes inspiration from her mother, who caught a snap return while jumping off a building, an event that left everyone who saw it shook. It was a defining moment in the sport, but unfortunately, that football was taken away from her by dirty tactics from Georgia State. Mimi decided to make her mom proud and get it back. She decided to terrorize this game, to make players scared, and she did it by owning the flooded South. Climate change flooded the South and made most of Florida and a good amount of Georgia completely submerged underwater, with some stadiums only being accessible by going through these waters. Since motor vehicles are banned, one can only use canoes, kayaks, things that could be hijacked by certain forward-thinking players. Mimi has single-handedly changed how the sport is played in the South. These areas are given such caution that they have become an absolute no-go zone, and the entire game has moved up north. Mimi claims that every ball that Georgia Southern has gotten has been due to her. She, of course, has taken balls that were going to be hidden in the flooded South from players in canoes, but moreover just shaping the way that people play the sport. To quote her, "I might leave your boat, or I might shove it far off the field, and your choice will be either to swim home or to quit. I don't care if you have a football or not. I don't want you here. Pardon my language, but get the fuck out of my lake." Mimi is dominant in a non-traditional way in the sport, but there are traditional players that still can make their name. This is found in quarterback and safety Valentine Jones. Valentine is arguably the greatest living football player. She can read the field like no one else and run fast as hell. She's basically unstoppable, and that has led her team to greatness. Unfortunately, the thing about leading a team to greatness is that often what works, what is most effective, just isn't all that fun. Valentine started as a quarterback and ran shop with her team, and she only became a safety because her team needed one, and now she's getting bored. Valentine is a player from a different era. She wants to play real American football. She wants to tackle some motherfuckers. She wants to be a big, strong quarterback with a big, strong team, run through this league and win. And of course, her team wants to win too, but what it means to win in 2020 is not what it means to win in traditional American football. College football now means not holding on to the ball long enough to be an enemy or picked off like our friends at Georgia Tech were. You need to drop it off, and that ends up being boring if you're a football player that doesn't like scouting, scavenging for footballs, and finding hiding spots. Valentine keeps staying on this team and in college football in general because, well, what the fuck else am I gonna do, to quote her directly. Her team keeps their football safe in an abandoned lighthouse just off the field. You don't throw footballs into the lighthouse or anything, you have to go off field to go in there. See, Juice had this idea when he was making the game. It's called OBT, out of bounds time. The idea is that for every full year one plays as a college football athlete, you get 1 second that you can use to go out of bounds. If you run out of OBT, you are ejected from the game for the rest of your immortal life, so it's important to be resourceful with them. Most players don't really think about this aspect of the game. It's cool, but it doesn't really get used for much. But for more forward-thinking players, this is a valuable tool. It allows players to, place balls off field and give more secrecy like Valentine's team does. But Juice is convinced that it is much more than that. He's convinced that this is where the future of his sport is going to go. OBT is the thing that will revolutionize college football, and this is why he's so interested and hyped up by Nick and Manny, because these are the players that are miles ahead of any of the other athletes in college football. Nick and Manny play for San Diego State, which is an outlier of a team. San Diego's field intersects with no other field. It's completely alone. It cannot interact with the game. Well, at least in a traditional sense. The only reason that they are still even in the game in the first place is due to a lot of lobbying and complaining. Juice has the final say on what goes and what doesn't go, and lets us know that it's not because of any of the lobbying that he's letting San Diego still play in this game. It's because Nick and Manny are passionate guys and he wants to see them play, so he came up with OBT as a gift to them. Nick and Manny trained on that small sliver that they were given as a field and trained for 1,500 years, saving up 25 minutes to make the 4.88-mile run to the closest field to them. They bolted, making the trip in a little bit under 19 minutes. They've now been on the field for about 500 years, and they have finally taken an opportunity to take all of Georgia Tech's balls and head back home. Nick and Manny's entire view of the game is different from anyone else. They understand what you can do in this game. If you think just a little bit differently and a bit outside of what's commonly thought, you can do some insane shit that no one is prepared for. This frame of reference lets Nick and Manny do a 13-mile train-assisted lateral, where Nick puts a specific amount of fuel on a train and has it land just in front of Manny, who's on a completely different field, with the train traveling through the out of bounds that separates the two fields. No one in the game had ever thought of anything close to that. To have the balls go straight through the out of bounds. They are forward thinking and completely under the radar. Of course, they won't be when they get back home and the entire sport realizes how small they've been thinking. How silly they have been to not look behind themselves and see the wings that they have had this entire time. The forward-thinking nature of Nick and Manny when compared to how most athletes think is best shown in the climax of this story. Throughout the entire story, these two are on the run, having to avoid all of the people that are losing their minds and trying to find these footballs. Near the end of the story, the boys seem to be at the end of the line. They are surrounded at all sides. The two would have to play a game of 2 against 125. This is it. Couldn't have gone on forever. Manny gives in. He realizes that his career is basically done. He will never get an opportunity to do anything close to this again. 9 footballs is unheard of. Most players don't even see one in their entire career. He hit the gold mine and is about to get robbed right outside. Manny says all this stuff out loud, accepting defeat. And Nick embraces him, gives him a hug, and then he says, "Meet me in Missouri." And he zooms off with the footballs, going down the road so he doesn't have to deal with the forest terrain, and he just books it. He has to run about 5 miles in 16 minutes and 30 seconds, which means you have to go about 20 miles per hour. Boyce shows us the updates that Nick is getting, counting down the seconds that he has left on the clock. If he doesn't do this, then he will be eliminated. 2,000 years are on the line, and he has to make all those years worth it. It's one of the most tense moments in any piece of fiction I have ever read. And he doesn't. He makes it. He fucking makes it. Nick and Manny are taking this game to another level, one that the sport is not prepared for. This moment holds one of the most important things in 17776 and 20020, though best explored in 20020 in my opinion, humans breaking through their limitations. 17776 has a large focus on the things that human beings could not do, even with unlimited time, mainly breaking the light barrier and exploring space. Humans seem predestined to stay on Earth, not to escape, placing their own limitations on themselves through a society they constructed to feel more human, and the games that they play which have defined them. Now, even though humans do have these hard limitations that they cannot overcome, they can always be resourceful and crafty. They can invent and advance things in other ways. This is shown in Nick, Manny, and Mimi. All athletes that have shown ingenuity and the ability to think outside of the lines. 20020 shows something that's not opposite to 17776, but more as an asterisk to it. That people will break, shape, and mold the rules that they place on themselves. Humans have the ability to overcome, change, and shape the limitations placed on themselves, whether this is in sports, philosophy, or prison. The ending of 20020 is all about Eugene Jennings, a career criminal and 5-time prison escapee. Nine feels a sadness over what he went through. He was sentenced to life in prison for robbery, stealing only $432, which he did without hurting anyone. He escaped the jail that he was held in 5 times. And he seemed to have a love for the world. He wanted to explore it, get lost in it, play in it. Nine looks at Eugene and says that someone like him would flourish in 20020. He would have loved this more than anyone else. A man that was so odd and unconventional in the present, not being able to be forgiven for his crimes, could truly enjoy some real freedom. He was forward-thinking to a fault, someone who broke the traditional lines. Humans will find a way to break through and surprise over and over and over again. At the end of the story, Ten and Juice are talking about how amazing Nick is, and how they feel that in a couple 100,000 of years, humans will push their bodies even more. However, this is a basic message. We've all seen this before. Human beings are strong and they will overcome. This is a basic message, and Bois is anything but a basic writer, so he adds a little spice to this mix. Human beings have stuff that they cannot break through. This is all the stuff from 17776. Space is still referenced in this story as this infinite thing, almost too large and complex for reasoning. There's no reason to it. It just exists. We know how and why it exists, but good luck giving any, real purpose to just a couple of atoms in the middle of nothing. It's a scary realization. Mimi has a line about this in specific. I don't look up a whole lot. The world's already too big as it is, Infinity is still a bit much for humans. Just thinking outside of the box is too much for some. Some kind of restriction is just inherent with being a human. We will probably never grow actual wings, or stop having to go to the bathroom, or not rely on oxygen and hydrogen. That's just what it means to be a human. That's an inherent limit placed on us. I've heard some interpretations of 17776 as nihilistic. They see Bois as saying that there is no purpose to humans, that we are not meant to go past our solar system home, that we have hard limitations on us that cannot be overcome, and that humans must abandon their intellectual and scientific pursuits in the face of the overwhelming impossibility of it all. I can understand this reading. I say parts of it are supported by the text, but I think a crucial thing that must be added alongside it is that that's not a bad thing. 17776 is an optimistic work. Bois's original purpose of the story was to escape the Church of Death worship and enjoy a story that can be optimistic for a future where man does not kill each other over resources and can just come together and play. 20020 takes this optimism and runs with it. Don't look up at the sky for your depression. Instead, look at your fellow human and all of the ability they have to break the rules, and look at that for optimism. Human beings may not be able to do the impossible, but they can sure as hell redefine what is and is not impossible. When eventually the coach of the team in pursuit of Nick and Manny, who just so happens to be Lucretia Evans, the former 500 player, she just says good game and decides to resign. She has seen nothing like this before. When she is talking to Manny, she has a line I find to be quite interesting. It taught me how good it can be sometimes to just let go, walk away. That's my advice, I guess. Lord, I hope you all make it, but don't let it eat you up if you don't. We've all had enough sadness in our time. No need for you to go off and make more of your own. Life's too long for that. you get a trillion tomorrows. Evans is a character that has had nothing but bad luck when it comes to sport, so this line from her could be seen as someone who, in the face of getting the least likely hand dealt to her, is just giving up in the face of a sport that is actively against her. That is part of what this line is about, of course, but I think there's another part to it. As much as this is a line about, fuck it, football won, I think it also holds something that makes this message more dynamic. Don't do what doesn't make you happy. Chuck Hamilton is an interesting character in 2020. He doesn't really seem to have a purpose that connects with the whole main plot of Nick and Manny's cross-country sneak fest. He's just a dude who fumbled and can't find the ball anymore, not even after 63 years. I was weirded out when I first read this section. Did Bois just really want to shit on the character Johnny Appleseed? A nursery rhyme character who's charming, but in reality was a white colonialist, a view of genocide that is charming and quaint, a view that America tries to throw on all of its citizens? Well, it is that, of course. Anyone that knows Bois's political opinions knows that this is something he would feel, but that's a small bit of this chapter. What I think this chapter is talking about is not taking the game as the focus of life, as the thing that has absolute power over one's own self and happiness. Someone like Chuck is miserable because he can't find this damn football. Clearly, this game means a lot to people, and play means a lot to a lot of people in this immortal world, but remember, there are 7 billion people in the world in 2020. And 125 players on 111 teams means that there is about 13,875 active athletes in the sport of college football. That makes it so that 0.00026% of the world has an active stake in this game. And even then, we see players that play the game but just don't really care about it. There are references to people that sign up for just a season just so they can say that they have been a professional football player. 2020 is so interesting to me because it features 2 separate characters named that quit their roles in college football, with a handful of others questioning if they even want to play it anymore. Bryce Schaefer walks off the field and gets ejected in one scene because he doesn't want to play in the flooded mess that is Florida and doesn't really care about playing in the first place. And when he gets the call from Juice saying that he can never play again, he just says, "Fuck you, bitch," and hangs up. Juice laughs and says good on him. "Fuck jobs," Juice says. The thing is, that was not Bryce's job. That's just something Bryce chose not to do. I read this in a couple of ways. The first one is that Juice doesn't really care for the player experience, and that has an effect on how many people will play your game. And if you're creating a game like this, you should try to make it somewhat fun, or you're not going to have a long-lasting player base, and may result in getting people like Tucker, a big, loud son of a bitch who just gets flustered in the pocket and chucks the ball. However, Juice loves this shit. He wants all the interesting side characters to get trusted with protagonist duties. Hell, I love it too. The only reason I'm mentioning Tucker here is for this interaction between Juice and Nine. Now, this is what we call Tucker time. He's gonna lose his shit and just fucking airmail it. It's what he does. I bet he throws an INT here. Oh, the fucking bum. Oh no. Oh no, don't you do it. Throw it! Don't you throw it! Chuck it, you loser! Destroy yourself! I love you! A third reading, and this is the one that scares me the most, is that one should not treat the football game as the end-all be-all thing in the world, and should instead treat immortal life as more than just a game. This reading scares me the most because even though it is a hopeful message about how we should take the blessing of life to its fullest extent and not just waste it all on games that make us miserable, I can only read it as Bois foreshadowing some character having to deal with a grand defeat or failure that is football related. And I do not want to see Nick and Manny fail. I love these dudes. However, these are all guesses for what this and other themes and ideas mean. At the time of recording, it is October 29th, 2020, and 2021 has not come out yet. So this entire video is only looking at half of a story. There are things in here that I am sure are going to go in interesting directions in the sequel. We still have the entire run back to San Diego to look forward to. I refuse to believe that Valentine was not set up to come back later as some kind of threat to Nick and Manny. We still have no clue how Michigan got all their balls. There are a lot of questions and ideas still left to explore, and I am looking forward to all of them. As much as it saddens me to say that this is just part 1 and I have to wait for part 2, I would much rather say why does it have to end than why did it come out like this. I trust Bois to take as much time as necessary if it means that it will be the best story from him. Before I end this video, I want to touch on one more interesting question. Is this heaven? Did humans take advantage of their own immortality to make their own heaven, where they don't need to worry about anything except for sports? And the answer is no. This is not heaven. Immortality does mean eternal, but it does not mean perfect. But that's not a bad thing. 10 sums it up quite well in this little line. Perfection is the end of the road. Why the hell would you want to be at the end of the road? The idea of heaven is flawed for an immortal being. You're alive forever and you're going to want something to do, whether that's fixing something, studying, or involving in oneself that appears to be an impossible game of American football. For a being that is at the end of time, nothing can be worse than being done, than being finished. You need that reason to keep on going, to continue caring. 2020 does not take place in heaven. It takes place with people at the end of time, reinventing possibilities, giving meaning to the sports games that they love so much.
Nothing necessarily belongs to a greater theme or narrative arc, although it sometimes does. Nothing is scripted, nothing is achieved, nothing is taught, nothing is learned. Things are only meaningful as long as we decide they are. It's purely a celebration of human beings at their best and weirdest, and the bizarre, accidental stories they tell within this moon colony.
Also, Bois is not praised enough as a comedy writer, so to play this video out, I'm going to pick some of my favorite quotes from 2020. Please enjoy. Give me money on Patreon. Thank you so much. Love you. It's very lonely being a test. The essay question is the closest I ever get to having a conversation. Please don't go. Save me. I love you. Ass, 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 oof, oof, ass, fuck, ass, ass. No, that game was artless crap, and its rules had nothing to say about the game. I loved it, but this. Upon the sight of it, Satan himself flees in terror to the comfort of his simple pentagram. College football is back, baby. Now, the most common misconception about the sun is that it's a jolly goblin who helpfully pours raisins into your cereal. This is false! In my view, basketballs should be filled with heavy whipped cream. Over the course of the game, all the dribbling may eventually whip the cream into butter. This will surely make the basketball more difficult to dribble. However, the winning team will be awarded with a delicious basketball filled with butter. Pretty neat. I'm Andy, and I recently found a weird frog in my backyard. If you're an expert on frogs and find yourself in or near Little Rock, Arkansas, please contact me so you can help me learn what kind of frog it is. Thank you. This morning I came up with the idea of carbonated broth. They sell machines now that let you carbonate beverages, but I don't have one of those. If you happen to own one, please try carbonating some broth and let me know how it tastes. Broth pop sounds refreshing to me. That's fuck it. That's the only thing you need to read from 2020. The movie Predator was called Predator because it predated Predator 2. How Predator 2 got its name, I have no idea. Although I have reached the difficult decision of suspending my campaign, I will not abandon my fight against mosquitoes. I remain convinced that we can and will find sustainable alternative food sources for bats, birds, toads, and all of God's creatures who feast on these bedbugs of the sky. Jones ran as a member of the Fuck Mosquitoes Party, a fringe movement dedicated to a nationwide eradication of mosquitoes. I'm going to dress up as a car for Halloween. I'm going to drive around in my car, and that will be my costume. This is the best idea I have ever had. Every time I see those little guys hit the ceiling, they bust through it. Almost makes you wish there were extraterrestrial life out there just so that they could peek in and get a load of this shit. Well, they got us. Someone out here sees them. Someone out here knows.